The first thing Marlowe Quinn received on his wedding day was not a kiss. It was a contract. 12 pages, cream-colored paper, black ink, and one sentence his eyes kept returning to no matter how hard he tried to look away. The marriage shall remain in effect through the successful completion of pregnancy and the mutually agreed postpartum period. Romantic. Nothing said forever. Nothing said love. Nothing even said wanted. Marlowe rested one hand over the small, barely visible curve beneath his ivory suit jacket and reminded himself why he was here. 6 months ago, he had been juggling freelance recipe work, overdue rent, and the terrifying realization that wanting a child someday required a kind of stability he had never managed to build. Now he was already pregnant, medically protected, financially secure, and about to become the legal husband of one of America's most famous alpha chefs. It should have felt like winning. Instead, Marlowe felt like the most expensive item on somebody else's grocery list. Across the private ceremony room, Dash O'Rourke signed his name with one clean stroke. Dash didn't smile for the photographer his family had insisted on hiring. He didn't pretend this was something it wasn't. He simply set down the pen, turned to Marlowe, and said quietly, "You can still walk away." That surprised him. Marlowe looked at the man whose restaurants had appeared in magazines Marlowe used to read while eating boxed noodles over his kitchen sink. 5 minutes before the ceremony. 5 seconds before it, if that's what you want. Dash reached for the contract, closed the folder, and pushed it toward Marlowe instead of himself. "My family wanted this arrangement. I agreed to it. That doesn't mean you lose the right to change your mind." For the first time that morning, Marlowe forgot to feel humiliated. He studied Dash's face, searching for manipulation and finding only uncomfortable sincerity. "And if I don't walk away? Then I keep every promise in that contract." There it was. Contract. Not marriage. Not us. Marlowe swallowed the small, ridiculous sting. He had known the terms before agreeing. Dash needed a husband and a child to satisfy the family expectations surrounding the Rourke legacy. Marlowe needed security, excellent prenatal care, and a future where one bad month of freelance work couldn't threaten his home. Nobody had lied. "Then let's get married," Marlowe said. An hour later, he was Dash O'Rourke's husband. By sunset, he was standing inside Dash's Chicago penthouse with one suitcase beside his ankle, wondering how a home could be so beautiful and feel so completely unlived in. Pale oak, cream stone, floor-to-ceiling windows glowing gold over the city, and a kitchen that could have belonged in a luxury showroom. Marlowe stepped toward the marble island and stopped when the smell of freshly brewed espresso hit him. His stomach turned. He pressed a hand to his mouth. "Marlowe." Dash was across the room immediately. Not panicked, not dramatic, just there. Marlowe breathed carefully. "Coffee. Apparently the baby has declared war on it." Dash glanced at the expensive built-in machine. Then he did something Marlowe hadn't expected. He switched it off, unplugged it, carried the full carafe to the sink, and poured it out. "You don't have to do that." Dash was already opening a window. "You live here now." For words. Ridiculously ordinary words. They landed harder than the wedding vows had. Before Marlowe could answer, Dash's phone rang. The change in him was instant. His shoulders tightened. "Rourke," he answered. Silence. Then, "How many cancellations?" Marlowe looked away, but Dash's voice had gone too quiet not to hear. "No, don't cut another service yet. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and stood motionless for half a second, staring at nothing. For the first time, Marlowe didn't see the celebrity chef from television. He saw a man who was afraid. "Restaurant?" Marlowe asked. Dash picked up his coat. "It's nothing you need to worry about." The words weren't cruel, but they drew the boundary perfectly. "My world. Your world." Marlowe nodded. "Right." Dash made it 3 steps toward the elevator before stopping. He turned back, crossed to a cabinet, and pulled out a box of ginger tea. "My assistant said this sometimes helps with nausea." He placed it beside Marlowe without meeting his eyes. "I'll have the coffee removed tomorrow." Then he left. Marlowe stared at the tea. Something warm and inconvenient moved through his chest. Dash Rourke might not want love. He might barely know how to be a husband. But he had noticed. Later, searching for a mug, Marlowe found an old food magazine tucked behind a stack of pristine cookbooks. Dash was on the cover, younger, standing inside Rourke's kitchen beside his father. Both men were laughing. Marlowe looked from that open, joyful face to the dark windows where Dash had disappeared into the city. Then he noticed the headline beneath the photograph. The lost dish that built the Rourke legacy. Marlowe's fingers stilled. He knew that dish. Not the recipe. Not exactly. But something about the ingredients listed beneath the photograph pulled at an old memory, a flavor he had encountered years ago in a completely different kitchen. Marlowe slowly sat down, the magazine open beneath his hands. He had entered this marriage believing he knew nothing about Dash O'Rourke's world. Maybe Dash believed that too. But staring at the forgotten recipe that had once made his husband's restaurant famous, Marlowe realized something neither of them had considered. He might understand more than anyone knew. Marlowe woke the next morning to two discoveries. First, the espresso machine was gone. Not unplugged. Gone. In its place sat an electric kettle, 3 boxes of ginger tea, peppermint tea, crackers, and a handwritten card from Dash's assistant listing foods that might be easier during pregnancy. Second, Dash had apparently left the penthouse before sunrise. Marlowe stared at the empty space where a machine worth more than his first car had stood. That is an extremely expensive way to say good morning, he muttered. He told himself it meant nothing. Dash had promised to provide a comfortable pregnancy. Removing one nausea trigger was practically contract maintenance. Still, Marlowe made the ginger tea. By late afternoon, Dash had not returned, but his forgotten leather portfolio was sitting beside the entryway. His phone rang before Marlowe could decide whether touching it violated some invisible rich person rule. Marlowe. Dash sounded distracted. Behind him came the sharp rhythm of a professional kitchen. There is a black portfolio by the door. The one looking expensive and emotionally unavailable. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, a quiet laugh. It vanished so quickly Marlowe wondered if he had imagined it. That one. I need it before service. 25 minutes later, Marlowe stepped through the doors of Rourke and understood exactly what fame looked like when it had walls. The dining room was all warm walnut, cream linen, and amber glass. Near the entrance hung framed photographs of Dash beside actors, athletes, politicians, and chefs Marlowe recognized instantly. Through the open kitchen, however, celebrity disappeared. Dash stood at the center of controlled chaos in a white chef coat, calling times while cooks moved around him with absolute attention. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. 2 minutes on table 12. Sauce again on 7. That plate does not leave the pass. A cook immediately pulled it back. Marlowe almost smiled. At home, Dash could not remember where he kept tea. Here, 20 people moved when he lifted one finger. Then Dash saw him. His entire focus shifted. You came yourself? Your portfolio did not seem capable of taking a cab. Dash stepped away from the line and took it. His gaze dropped to Marlowe's coat, then to his face. Did you eat? Marlowe blinked. Hello to you too. That was not an answer. Yes. It was technically true if half a bagel counted. Dash stared for 1 second too long. Apparently famous chefs could detect lies about breakfast. Before Marlowe could defend himself, Dash turned toward a cook. Plain toast, sliced pear, no strong aromatics. Dash, I am fine. Good. Then you can be fine while eating. 5 minutes later, Marlowe was sitting at the quiet end of the bar with a plate prepared specifically for him, while Dash ran a restaurant that reportedly had a months-long reservation list. It should have felt controlling. Somehow it did not. Dash had not made a performance of caring. He had simply noticed. Marlowe finished every bite. Then the kitchen changed. A server returned a plate almost untouched. Dash examined it, jaw tightening. Another table had declined dessert. 2 seats at the bar remained empty despite what Marlowe had read about impossible reservations. The restaurant was beautiful. The food leaving the kitchen was beautiful. And something was wrong. Dash began plating a dish Marlowe recognized from the current menu. Smoked duck, cherry reduction, celery root, immaculate enough to photograph. He tasted the sauce and frowned. Adjusted it. Tasted again. Too sweet. Marlowe said before his survival instinct could stop him. 3 nearby cooks went very still. Dash slowly looked over. Excuse me. Marlowe considered pretending he had been speaking to the pair. Too late. Nothing. You said too sweet. I have made several poor decisions recently. Apparently, we are adding this one. Dash held out a clean-tasting spoon. Try it. Marlowe stared at him. Seriously? You had an opinion from 15 feet away. Earn it. There was the intimidating chef everyone knew. Marlowe approached the pass and tasted. Technically, it was nearly flawless. That was the problem. It is not too sweet, he said. Then what? Marlo hesitated. It tastes like it wants me to know how difficult it was to make. The kitchen became painfully silent. Dash's expression hardened. Meaning every bite is proving something. Marlo set down the spoon. But I do not know what I am supposed to feel. Dash stared at him. Marlo immediately wished the marble floor would open and politely swallow him. I should go. Probably, Dash said. That hurt more than it should have. Marlo collected his coat and left without looking back. He spent the ride home reminding himself that Dash had not married him for culinary criticism. Their lives had boundaries. He had crossed one. Fine. Lesson learned. Near midnight, the penthouse door opened. Marlo was at the kitchen island with the old magazine from the night before and a mug of ginger tea. Dash entered, loosened his collar, and placed a takeout container in front of him. What is this? Marlo asked. The duck. Are you trying to punish me? I changed it. Marlo looked up. Dash leaned against the counter. Exhausted but watchful. I simplified the sauce. Removed 2 components. Changed the finish. Because of what I said. Because you were right. The words landed with startling weight. Marlo opened the container and tasted. The dish was warmer now. Clearer. It stopped showing off long enough to become food. Better, Marlo admitted. Dash nodded once. Then his eyes moved to the magazine beneath Marlo's elbow. To the old photograph. To the lost dish. Something vulnerable flickered across his face before the famous chef could hide it. You have been studying that. Marlo closed the magazine carefully. I was curious. Dash was silent for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. Tomorrow night, after service, he said, come to the restaurant. Marlo frowned. Why? Dash met his eyes. Because this time, I want your opinion before the food reaches the dining room. Marlo's fingers tightened around his mug. Yesterday, he had been the contractual husband who supposedly knew nothing about Dash's world. Tonight, Dash O'Rourke had opened the first door into it himself. And judging by the way Dash was looking at the forgotten recipe between them, Marlo had the strange feeling that once he walked through that door, neither of them would be able to return to the marriage they had signed for. The next evening, Marlo arrived at Rourke 10 minutes after closing and discovered that being invited into Dash O'Rourke's kitchen did not mean anyone else thought he belonged there. The dining room had emptied, but 6 cooks were still cleaning their stations while Dash stood at the pass examining 3 bowls of nearly identical broth. Marlo had barely removed his coat when one of the senior cooks glanced at his visibly rounded stomach, then at Dash. Chef, should we clear the kitchen first? Dash did not look up. Why? I thought your husband was waiting for you. The word husband sounded suspiciously like guest. Marlo recognized that tone. He had heard versions of it in restaurant kitchens for years. Usually right before someone decided the quiet freelancer in the corner could not possibly understand their work. Dash finally raised his eyes. He is not waiting for me. He pushed a tasting spoon toward the empty place beside him. He is working with me. Silence. Small sentence. Massive effect. Marlo tried not to look pleased as he stepped beside Dash. You enjoy making rooms uncomfortable, do you not? Usually I charge for it. Marlo almost laughed. Dash pointed to the bowls. Taste them. What am I looking for? You tell me. Marlo tried the first broth. Clean, rich, carefully reduced. The second had more acidity. The third seemed almost identical until the finish lingered. He tasted again. The third one was held warmer for longer. Dash's eyebrows lifted. Why? The herbs flattened out, and the onion is sweeter. Maybe 20 minutes. A cook across the counter stopped polishing a pan. Dash checked the labels beneath the bowls. 23. Marlo blinked. That was disturbingly close. Again, Dash brought out 3 sauces. Then 2 vinaigrettes. Then pieces of roasted pear treated with different spices. It stopped feeling like a test somewhere around the 4th tasting. Dash began asking questions. Marlo began answering without apologizing first. He explained that he had spent years doing freelance recipe development for small cafes, meal companies, and independent cooks who needed formulas that could actually survive a busy service. No famous kitchens. No television appearances. Mostly anonymous work that appeared under somebody else's name. So you develop recipes professionally, Dash said. Sometimes. You told me you were a freelancer. I am. You made it sound like you design menus for neighborhood bake sales. Marlo shrugged. People hear freelance and usually stop asking. Dash's expression changed. Not pity. Irritation, somehow, but not at Marlo. I should have asked. For words again. Dash seemed dangerously good at making 4 words matter. A cook approached with a clipboard and began giving Dash tomorrow's prep numbers. Dash listened, approved 2 changes, rejected another, then stopped when Marlowe quietly pushed away a tasting plate. Nausea? He asked immediately. Every head nearby seemed to turn. Just a little. Dash looked at the prep list. No truffle oil at this station while Marlowe is here. The cook hesitated. Chef, we need it for tomorrow. Then use it after he leaves. No debate. No embarrassment. Dash simply rearranged the rhythm of his professional kitchen around Marlowe, as if his comfort belonged on the prep schedule. Marlowe looked down before anyone could see how much that affected him. 20 minutes later, Dash placed a bowl in front of him. Plain rice porridge, ginger, scallions, nothing decorative. You made this? Marlowe asked. Do not sound so surprised. I have several awards. None of them appear to be for porridge. Dash gave him a flat look. Marlowe tasted it and smiled despite himself. This might be your best dish. Leave my restaurant. But Dash was fighting a smile. The kitchen relaxed around them. Someone laughed. For the first time, Marlowe did not feel like the contractual Omega visiting a world that belonged to everyone except him. Then he noticed an old frame menu on the wall near Dash's office. The same dish from the magazine was printed at the bottom in faded lettering. Marlowe stepped closer. Dash followed, and the humor disappeared from his face. That was your father's dish. Yes. Why did you take it off the menu? Dash's thumb moved unconsciously over the heavy silver ring on his right hand, the same ring his father wore in the old photograph. Because I could make something that looked like it, he said. I could never make something that tasted like it. There was no arrogance in his voice now, only loss. Marlowe studied the old ingredient description. Roasted poultry, root vegetables, winter herbs, fermented fruit glaze. Something clicked softly in his memory. Dash. What? I think I have tasted something similar before. Dash went completely still. Marlowe immediately raised a hand. Similar. I am not saying I know your father's recipe. Where? A small kitchen I worked in years ago. The technique was old-fashioned. The flavor profile was close. Dash looked from Marlowe to the menu. Then he did something that made 2 cooks nearby openly stare. He reached into his pocket, removed the key to the locked development kitchen behind the main line, and placed it in Marlowe's palm. Tomorrow, Dash said. We start there. Marlowe closed his fingers around the key. It was heavier than it looked. So was the trust behind it. The night before, Dash had asked for his opinion. Tonight, he had given Marlowe access to the private kitchen where he developed every dish carrying his name. And as Dash's hand lingered for one quiet second over Marlowe's closed fist, Marlowe realized the contract between them had not changed at all. Somehow, everything else had. Marlowe learned the next morning that being trusted by Dash O'Rourke was considerably easier than being trusted by anyone who shared his last name. He and Dash had barely entered the development kitchen when a woman from the restaurant office appeared at the door and announced, Your mother is here. Dash stopped measuring stock. Of course she is. Marlowe glanced at him. That sounded cheerful. It was not. Evelyn Rourke arrived 5 minutes later with the polished calm of someone accustomed to entering rooms and immediately understanding who had authority inside them. She greeted Marlowe politely, asked about his pregnancy, then looked at the apron around his waist and the ingredients covering Dash's private counter. Her expression barely changed. Somehow that was worse. I thought the arrangement was supposed to simplify your life, she told Dash. It did. Then why is Marlowe involved with the restaurant? Marlowe concentrated very hard on a saucepan. Dash continued chopping an apple. Because I asked him to be. Evelyn looked at the old menu on the counter. You are working on your father's dish again. Yes. Her eyes returned to Marlowe. With him, there it was. Not cruelty, not even open contempt. Just disbelief that someone like Marlowe could belong in a conversation about the Rourke legacy. Marlowe knew that feeling well enough to hate how familiar it was. I only recognized a technique that might help, he said. Marlowe. Dash's knife stopped. You do not have to minimize what you know to make other people comfortable. The room went quiet. Marlowe looked at him. Dash did not soften the statement or smile afterward. He simply resumed chopping, as if defending Marlowe's competence were as obvious as seasoning food. Evelyn folded her hands. Dashiell, the restaurant is already vulnerable. You cannot rebuild its signature dish around an experiment from someone with no fine dining reputation. Neither can I rebuild it around pride, Dash replied. I tried that. Reservations dropped 30%. Marlowe had never heard Dash admit the number aloud. Evelyn's face tightened. This restaurant carries your father's name. It carries mine too. That means the failure is mine, and so is the decision about how I fix it. He pushed a tasting spoon toward Marlowe. Taste. Evelyn was still standing there. Marlowe wanted to disappear. Instead, he tasted the glaze. Apple, vinegar, herbs, reduced stock. Close, but wrong. Too clean, he said. Dash nodded immediately. I thought so. The version I remember had something fermented underneath it. Not enough to taste separately. Just enough to make everything else deeper. Dash reached for his notebook. Evelyn watched him write down Marlowe's words without hesitation. That, more than any argument, seemed to unsettle her. You trust his palate that much? She asked. Dash finally looked up. Yes. One word. No qualification. Marlowe felt it somewhere embarrassingly close to his heart. Evelyn left soon afterward, but her concern remained in the kitchen like smoke. Marlowe washed his hands and stared at the sink. She is not wrong about one thing. Dash looked over. Which thing? I do not have your reputation. If this fails, and people find out you let your contract husband experiment with the dish that built your family restaurant, they will make you look ridiculous. Then we do not fail because of reputation. Dash stepped closer and lowered his voice. We fail because the food is wrong, or we succeed because it is right. Those are the only opinions I care about in this kitchen. Marlowe gave him a skeptical look. You own a restaurant. Opinions literally determine whether people come through the door. Fine. Those are the only opinions I care about before lunch. Marlowe laughed before he could stop himself. Dash stared at him for a moment, and something in his expression went unexpectedly warm. Then Marlowe swayed. Barely. Just enough. Dash noticed immediately. His hand closed around Marlowe's elbow. Sit. I am fine. You said that yesterday. It was also unconvincing yesterday. Dash guided him toward the stool, brought water, then disappeared into the main kitchen. He returned with toast and sliced pear. Again, Marlowe looked at the plate, then at him. Do you feed everyone who disagrees with your mother? Only the ones carrying my child and correcting my sauces. The words were practical. The way Dash pulled the stool closer to the counter so Marlowe could keep working while seated was not. Marlowe ate. Dash cooked. For 20 quiet minutes, the world outside the development kitchen disappeared. Then Dash tasted their fourth attempt and froze. Marlowe straightened. What? Dash tasted again. His eyes closed for half a second. Closer. Marlowe's pulse jumped. How close? Dash opened his eyes. Close enough that I remembered something. He crossed to the framed photograph of his father and touched the silver ring on his own hand. He used to start preparing this before sunrise. I always thought it was because the restaurant opened early. Marlowe looked at the fermenting fruit on their counter. Maybe he needed time. Dash turned toward him. They both understood at once. The missing element might not be another ingredient. It might be time itself. Dash pulled a fresh notebook from the shelf and placed it between them. On the first page, instead of writing his own name, he wrote to Dash O'Rourke. Marlowe Quinn. We start again tomorrow at 5 in the morning, he said. Marlowe stared at their names side by side. You realize I am pregnant. 5 in the morning is an act of hostility. 5:30. Still hostile. 6. Marlowe smiled. Deal. And for the first time since signing the marriage contract, he realized he was no longer preparing himself for the moment he would have to face everything alone. Dash had quietly moved to his side. The frightening part was that Marlowe was beginning to want him there. Marlowe arrived at Rourke at 6 the next morning expecting an experiment. By 8, he realized Dash had been avoiding a memory. The fermented apple mixture had rested overnight, and the moment Marlowe warmed it with reduced stock and winter herbs, Dash stopped moving. Not the concentrated stillness of a chef evaluating flavor. Something else. His thumb rubbed the silver ring on his right hand. Once. Twice. The same nervous gesture Marlowe had seen whenever Dash's father came up. You recognize the smell, Marlowe said. Dash reached for a spoon. Let me taste it. Marlowe caught his wrist. Dash. Dash looked down at Marlowe's hand, then at his face. Please. That word sounded wrong coming from a man who usually issued instructions like gravity issued laws. Marlowe released him. Dash tasted the sauce. His eyes closed. When they opened again, the famous chef was gone. For one unguarded second, Marlowe saw a grieving son. That is it, Dash whispered. Marlowe's heart jumped. The missing flavor? Dash nodded, but there was no triumph in his face. Fermented apple peel. My father started it before sunrise because it needed hours at room temperature before he finished the glaze. Marlowe smiled in disbelief. We found it. You found it. We found it. Dash stared at the saucepan as if it contained a ghost. Then he said, There is something I should have told you. The happiness inside Marlowe cooled. Dash crossed to his office and returned carrying a thin black folder. Marlowe recognized it immediately. He had seen it on Dash's desk twice before, always closed whenever someone entered. Inside were financial reports, reservation projections, and a formal recommendation from the restaurant's advisors dated 3 months before the wedding. Marlowe read the final line twice. Suspend operations if the winter relaunch fails. You knew, he said. Dash did not pretend otherwise. Yes. You knew the restaurant might close before you married me. Yes. Marlowe looked up sharply. You told me it was nothing I needed to worry about. Dash's jaw tightened. Because it was my problem. I live in your home. I am carrying our child. My financial security is literally part of the agreement you asked me to sign. Your protection does not depend on the restaurant. The funds, covering you and the baby, are separate. That is not the point. Marlowe pushed the folder toward him. You keep deciding what I am allowed to know. Dash went still. That landed. Marlowe hated that his eyes were burning now, because anger was easier when it did not hurt. You asked me to work beside you. You gave me a key. You put my name in your notebook. I thought that meant you trusted me. I do. No. You trust my palate. Dash flinched almost imperceptibly. Marlowe continued before courage abandoned him. You trust me with sauces. You trust me with recipes. But when something can actually hurt you, you lock it in a folder and tell me not to worry. Dash looked toward the empty dining room. My father nearly lost this place once when I was a teenager. I watched him stop sleeping, stop eating, stop being my father because every conversation became about saving Rourke. His fingers closed around the silver ring. When he died, everyone looked at me like I had inherited some sacred thing I was not allowed to fail. So I learned not to let anyone carry it with me. Marlowe's anger softened, but it did not disappear. Now he understood Dash better. That somehow made the secrecy hurt more. You married me because a contract was safer than needing somebody. Dash said nothing. Silence answered for him. Marlowe looked at the sauce between them. They had spent days reconstructing a flavor Dash had believed was gone forever, and suddenly Marlowe understood the contradiction at the center of him. Dash could identify every ingredient in a dish except fear. He simply called that responsibility. I am sorry, Dash said. No defense. No command. I should have told you. Marlowe wanted to accept it. He wanted the warmth of last night back, when 2 names on one notebook page had felt like a beginning. Instead, he stepped away. I need some air. Dash's hand moved as though he might stop him, then fell. All right. Marlowe reached the door before Dash spoke again. The sauce is right. Marlowe turned. Dash stood alone beneath the kitchen lights, looking more vulnerable than Marlowe had ever seen him. I spent years trying to recreate that dish, Dash said. I kept adding things because I thought something complicated had to be missing. You listened to one memory I gave you and found what I could not. His voice lowered. Whatever happens between us, do not let my mistake make you doubt what you did here. Marlowe could not answer. He left. For the first time since the wedding, Dash did not follow with tea, food, instructions, or a solution. That afternoon, Marlowe returned to the penthouse alone. On the kitchen island sat the old magazine, the ginger tea, and the marriage contract. 3 objects that suddenly seemed to represent 3 different versions of the man he had married. Then his phone lit up with a message from Dash. No excuses. No request to come back. Only a photograph of the development notebook. Beneath their 2 names, Dash had written one new line. Final recipe development, Marlowe Quinn. Marlowe stared at it until his anger became something more difficult. Dash had hidden the depth of his failure because he was terrified of being seen failing. Yet when the first real success came, he had given the credit away without hesitation. Marlowe placed a hand over his stomach and looked toward the darkening Chicago skyline. He still did not know whether he could trust Dash with his heart. But tomorrow, the restaurant would test the lost dish for the first time. And whether either man was ready or not, what Marlowe had created could change the future of Rourke forever. Marlowe returned to Rourke the next afternoon for one reason. The recipe deserved to be tested, even if his marriage did not feel nearly as certain. Dash was already in the development kitchen when he arrived, but something was different. No instructions. No assumptions. Dash placed the notebook on the counter and stepped back. Your recipe. Your call. Marlowe looked at him carefully. You are letting me run the test? I am asking you to. It was a small distinction. Marlowe noticed it anyway. He tied on his apron. For the next 2 hours, they worked with a careful distance between them. Marlowe adjusted the fermented apple glaze while Dash prepared the stock. When Marlowe asked for more acidity, Dash added it without challenging him. When Dash suggested reducing the sauce another 3 minutes, Marlowe considered it instead of automatically resisting. Trust did not return like a light switching on. It returned in teaspoons, in questions, in the quiet decision to listen. The final test plate was nearly finished when Marlowe's hand suddenly stopped over the counter. Dash noticed immediately. What is wrong? Nothing. Dash gave him a look. Marlowe sighed. The baby is apparently practicing gymnastics against my ribs. Dash's expression changed so quickly it almost made Marlowe laugh. Concern replaced concentration. Sit down. I can finish the plate. The plate has survived without you for 28 years. It can survive 5 minutes. Dash pulled over the same stool from their earlier sessions, brought water, and crouched beside him instead of returning to the food. Marlowe watched him. You do realize hovering is not medically useful. I am not hovering. You are approximately 18 inches from my knee. Dash looked genuinely offended by the measurement. Then Marlowe felt another movement and instinctively pressed his palm against his stomach. Dash's eyes followed. He did not reach out. That mattered. Do you want to feel? Marlowe asked. Dash looked up as if he had misheard him. Are you sure? Marlowe nodded. Dash placed his hand where Marlowe guided it. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the baby moved. Dash froze. The man who could command an entire kitchen with 2 words stared at Marlowe's stomach with complete wonder. That was him. Unless I swallowed a very determined goldfish. Dash laughed. Not the controlled little breath Marlowe had heard before. A real laugh. Warm, surprised, almost young. And Marlowe understood something painful. Dash had not merely been keeping Marlowe outside. He had spent years keeping himself inside. Later, rain hammered against the restaurant windows while the staff went home. Dash insisted on driving Marlowe back rather than letting him call a car. Halfway to the penthouse, traffic stopped beneath a curtain of Chicago rain. Dash kept both hands on the steering wheel. My father never admitted when he was afraid, he said suddenly. Marlowe turned toward him. Dash watched the red brake lights ahead. When the restaurant struggled, he told everyone he had it handled. My mother believed him. I believed him. Then one night, I found him asleep at his desk surrounded by overdue invoices. His thumb moved over the silver ring. I promised myself I would never let people see me like that. So you became impossible. Efficient. Impossible with excellent tailoring. Dash almost smiled. Then his expression fell again. When Rourke started failing, I thought if I told you, you would look at me differently. Marlowe did not rescue him from the confession. I do look at you differently. Dash's jaw tightened. I know. But not because the restaurant is failing. Marlowe waited until Dash looked at him. Because you decided I could only handle the polished version of you. Silence filled the car. I am still angry, Marlowe said. You should be. And I need you to stop deciding what protects me without asking me. Dash nodded. I can do that. Do not promise. Do it. All right. The rain softened. Something between them did too. When they reached the penthouse, Dash did not disappear into his office. He made Marlowe ginger tea, then sat across from him at the kitchen island with his own dinner instead of eating over restaurant paperwork. No grand apology. No declaration. Just presence. Marlowe noticed Dash had made the same plain porridge that had become their strange little ritual. You know, Marlowe said, for a celebrity chef, your courtship menu is deeply unimpressive. Dash looked up. Courtship. Marlowe nearly dropped his spoon. That is not what I meant. Interesting. Forget I spoke. Dash's smile stayed for the rest of dinner. The next morning, Marlowe found something new beside his tea. Not flowers. Not jewelry. A printed copy of Rourke's complete financial recovery plan, including the pages Dash had hidden before. On top was a note in Dash's handwriting. No more closed folders. Marlowe read it twice. Then his phone buzzed. The winter relaunch had been moved forward. An influential group of food writers had confirmed reservations for opening night, and the restaurant needed the restored dish ready in 48 hours. Marlowe looked toward Dash, standing across the kitchen waiting for his reaction instead of making the decision for him. 48 hours? Marlowe asked. We can postpone. There it was again. A choice. Marlowe closed the folder and stood. No. Dash raised an eyebrow. Marlowe handed him his apron. We have a restaurant to save. Dash took it, but instead of turning away, he held Marlowe's gaze for one quiet second longer than necessary. Their marriage might still exist on paper. Whatever they were building now did not. 48 hours later, Marlowe stood inside a dining room filled with people who could decide whether Rourke survived. And for the first time since the wedding, he wished he were invisible again. The relaunch had begun beautifully. Every table was occupied. Food writers sat beneath amber lights while plates moved through the room with perfect timing. In the kitchen, Dash commanded service with quiet precision, but every few minutes his eyes found Marlowe near the pass. Water appeared beside Marlowe before he asked. A stool had been placed discreetly near his station. When Marlowe tasted the restored glaze and nodded, Dash sent the first plate. It should have been the moment everything changed for them. Then Evelyn Rourke entered the kitchen holding a phone. Dashiell. Dash heard something in her voice and immediately stepped away from the pass. Marlowe watched his expression harden as he read the screen. What happened? Dash did not answer. That was the first warning. The second came when phones began appearing around the dining room. Servers whispered. A food writer looked toward the open kitchen, then directly at Marlowe. His own phone vibrated. He opened the message and felt the floor disappear beneath him. Someone had leaked photographs of pages from the marriage contract. Not all of it. Only the worst parts. Financial support. Pregnancy provisions. The agreed duration of the marriage. Beside the images was a story claiming Marlowe had married a desperate celebrity chef for money, then inserted himself into the restaurant's relaunch to build a culinary career from the Rourke name. The article called him an opportunist, a contract husband playing chef. Marlowe stopped breathing for a second. That is not what happened, he whispered. Dash was already speaking to his attorney on the phone. Find out who obtained it. Now. But the dining room did not wait for facts. A guest near the open kitchen said loudly. So that is why his name is suddenly attached to the menu. Another voice answered. Smart arrangement. Get the husband, the baby, and a career. Marlowe felt every old humiliation return at once. Anonymous freelancer. Outsider. Someone whose work belonged under somebody else's name. He looked at Dash. He needed one thing. Not money. Not a lawyer. Not protection written into 12 pages. He needed Dash to look at that room and say the truth. Instead, Dash stared at the leaked pages on his phone, completely still. Dash, Marlowe said. Dash looked up. There was anger in his face, but something else too. Calculation. Give me 5 minutes. Marlowe's chest tightened. 5 minutes for what? I need to know exactly what they have before I say anything publicly. It was logical, careful, probably even smart. But Marlowe was standing in a room where strangers were deciding that everything he had earned was purchased through his marriage, and the man who knew otherwise was asking him to wait. Evelyn stepped closer. Marlowe, perhaps you should go upstairs until this settles. There was no cruelty in her voice, which somehow made it worse. Hide him. Remove the embarrassment. Protect the brand. No, Marlowe said quietly. Dash turned. Marlowe, do you think I leaked it? The question stopped him. No. Do you think I used you to get into this kitchen? No. Then why am I the one being asked to disappear? Dash's face changed. I did not ask you to disappear. You asked me to wait while everyone else gets to decide who I am. A food writer approached the pass. Chef Rourke, can you confirm whether your husband was financially compensated under the marriage agreement? Dash's attorney was still speaking through the phone. Dash glanced toward the dining room, then at Marlowe. 1 second. 2. 3. Marlowe knew that silence had reasons. Legal reasons. Business. Reasons. The kind of reasons Dash had spent his whole life obeying. But pain was not reasonable. Marlowe removed his apron. Dash immediately stepped toward him. Do not leave. I cannot stand here while people call my work fake and watch you calculate the safest response. Marlowe, I am trying to protect you. The words hit exactly where they should not have. Marlowe gave a small, broken laugh. You promised you would stop deciding what protection looks like without asking me. Dash went silent. This time, Marlowe could see the realization hurt him. He placed the apron on the counter beside the notebook bearing both their names. The recipe is ready. Your team knows every step. You do not need me for service. That is not true. Then you should have said it when the room needed to hear it. Marlowe walked through the dining room with dozens of eyes following him. Nobody stopped him. Outside, cold Chicago rain had started falling, and he stood beneath the awning with one hand over his stomach, trying to understand how quickly belonging could disappear. His phone vibrated again. More notifications. More strangers discussing his marriage like evidence. Marlowe turned the phone off. Upstairs, behind the restaurant windows, he could see Dash standing motionless near the pass. For one terrible moment, Marlowe remembered the morning of their wedding, when Dash had promised to keep every promise in the contract. That had once sounded safe. Now Marlowe understood what he had actually wanted from him. One promise that had never been written down. Choose me when choosing me cost you something. Inside Rourke, Dash slowly lowered his phone. His attorney was telling him to issue no statement until they identified the source of the leak. His advisors were telling him to separate the restaurant from Marlowe until the story cooled. His mother was telling him the evening could still be saved. Dash looked at the empty stool beside the pass, the abandoned apron, and the dish Marlowe had brought back from his childhood. Then he looked through the rain-streaked glass at the man walking away from him. For the first time in his life, Dash O'Rourke had followed every sensible rule and knew with absolute certainty that he had made the wrong choice. Marlowe had made it half a block through the rain when every phone inside Rourke began buzzing again. This time, it was not another leak. Dash had ordered the dining room doors closed. Not locked. Closed. Service stopped with 32 guests still seated and one of the most important food critics in Chicago halfway through the restored dish. Dash walked out of the kitchen in his white chef coat, carrying 3 things: the development notebook, the original marriage contract, and the financial folder he had once hidden from Marlowe. His attorney followed him with a tablet. Evelyn stood near the bar, pale with disbelief. Dashiell, think carefully. Dash placed everything on an empty table. That is what caused this problem. The room fell silent. Dash looked toward the food writers first. The photographs circulating tonight are authentic pages from my marriage agreement. Whispers moved instantly through the room. Dash did not flinch. Marlowe Quinn receives financial protection under that agreement. He is also carrying my child. Those facts are true. The claim that he used our marriage to obtain a position at this restaurant is not. His attorney turned the tablet toward the nearest reporters. The screen showed document access records. The leaked photographs had come from a digital copy stored with the Rourke family office, a version Marlowe had never possessed. Only 4 authorized accounts had opened it during the previous month. One had downloaded the photograph pages that morning. Evelyn stared at the screen. Who? Dash's expression hardened. Martin Keene. Marlowe knew the name. The Rourke family business advisor who had recommended suspending restaurant operations if the relaunch failed. Dash continued before anyone could interrupt. Mr. Keene has been advising my family to close Rourke and sell the lease while representing an investment group interested in this property. The room changed. Suddenly the leak had a motive. A failed relaunch made the sale easier. Discrediting Marlowe discredited the restored dish and destabilized the restaurant on the one night it needed credibility most. Dash's attorney added calmly that the access logs, emails, and disclosure records had already been preserved and forwarded to the appropriate parties. Keene had not invented the contract. He had done something simpler. He had selected the pieces most useful to him and built a lie around what he omitted. Evelyn sank slowly into a chair. I trusted him. Dash looked at his mother. So did I? That is why he had access. No triumph. No cruelty. Just consequence. He does not anymore. Then Dash opened the development notebook. Page after page showed dates, tests, tasting notes, and Marlowe's corrections. Dash held it where the room could see both names written together. Marlowe did not ask to work here. I asked him. He did not attach himself to the relaunch. I brought him into it. And the dish you are eating tonight exists because he identified the technique I failed to recover for years. Someone asked, so you are saying the recipe is his? Dash shook his head. I am saying the restoration is ours, and the breakthrough was his. Outside, Marlowe had stopped beneath the awning. A server had run after him and quietly told him Dash was speaking. Against every defensive instinct he had, Marlowe returned. He entered just as Dash removed his own name card from the printed relaunch menu. Starting tonight, every menu will credit Marlo Quinn as recipe development collaborator. Dash handed the card to his manager. Reprint them. Evelyn stood. Dashiell, you do not have to make a permanent business decision in the middle of a personal scandal. Dash looked across the room and saw Marlo. Everything in his face shifted. His voice did not. This is not a personal favor. He earned the credit. Then Dash walked toward him. 32 guests watched. So did the kitchen staff, his mother, his attorney, and every person who had spent the last hour discussing Marlo like a clause in someone else's life. Dash stopped several feet away, giving him space. I should have spoken sooner. Marlo's throat tightened. Yes. I thought gathering proof before speaking would protect you. I know. I was wrong. Dash glanced toward the room. So, I am going to say, the part that does not require an attorney. He turned back to the guests. Our marriage began as an agreement. I will not lie about that to make tonight prettier. But Marlo's talent is not contractual. His place in this kitchen is not contractual. My respect for him is not contractual. His eyes returned to Marlo. And neither is the fact that when he walked out that door, this restaurant stopped mattering to me for a moment. The silence that followed felt enormous. Dash took the original contract from the table and held it out to Marlo instead of tearing it himself. This document will never be used to keep you somewhere you do not choose to be. Marlo looked at the pages, then at the man holding them. Weeks ago, he would have needed Dash's status to prove he belonged. Tonight, he did not. The notebook proved his work. The dish proved his ability. He had proved himself. Dash had simply refused to let anyone erase it. Marlo took the contract. Finish service, he said softly. Dash searched his face. Are you staying? Marlo looked toward the kitchen, where his apron still waited beside the pass. Then he looked at the dining room that had watched him leave ashamed and return with his name restored. I am staying for my dish. A tiny smile touched Dash's mouth. Fair. Marlo stepped closer. And after service, we talk about everything else. Everything. Everything. Dash nodded. Then, in front of everyone, he pulled out the stool he always kept near Marlo's station and set a glass of water beside it before returning to the pass. The gesture was so ordinary that Marlo almost laughed. Of course, that was what finally broke the tension in his chest. Not the public statement. Not the evidence. Not even the menu. It was Dash remembering that he got tired when he stood too long. Marlo tied his apron back on and took his place beside him. The next plate went out carrying the restored recipe and, for the first time, both of their names. The restaurant had survived the night. Marlo's dignity had survived it too. But the contract remained folded in his pocket, and when Dash's hand brushed his as they reached for the same tasting spoon, both men knew there was still one question no document could answer. When the obligation ended, would they still choose each other? By the time the last guest left Rourke, it was nearly midnight, and Marlo was holding the same thing he had held on his wedding day, a contract. Only now, standing beneath the warm lights of the empty restaurant, he understood the difference between being given security and being given a choice. The relaunch had worked. Every plate of the restored dish had returned empty. Reservations were already climbing, and 2 food writers had requested interviews about the collaboration behind the new menu. Rourke had something that had been missing for years. Not perfection. A reason for people to feel something again. Dash dismissed the remaining staff, removed his chef coat, and returned to find Marlo sitting at the same table where the contract had been displayed earlier. You said we would talk, Dash said. We are going to. Marlo placed the folded document between them. Dash did not sit immediately. Before you decide anything, there is something I need to do. He opened his briefcase and removed a second document. Marlo stared at it. If that is another contract, I may actually throw a famous chef out of his own restaurant. It is the termination agreement. Marlo stopped joking. Dash set it beside the original. I signed it. What? Your financial protection remains intact. So does everything established for the baby. But your obligation to remain married to me is gone. Marlo looked at the signature. Dashiell Rourke. Clean. Final. Already signed. Dash had given up the one thing the original arrangement guaranteed him before knowing what Marlo would choose. Your family wanted this marriage. They did. You wanted an heir. Dash's expression tightened. I thought I wanted a solution. He finally sat across from Marlo. Then you moved into my home and made fun of my coffee machine. Your coffee machine attacked me first. You criticized my duck. It deserved criticism. You walked into the restaurant I spent my entire adult life trying to control and somehow became the person whose opinion I looked for before my own. Marlowe's throat tightened. Dash did not reach for him. That mattered too. I do not want you here because of the baby, Dash said. I do not want you here because you saved Rourke. And I will never again ask a document to make you stay because I am afraid to ask you myself. He pushed the termination agreement toward Marlowe. You are free. Marlowe stared at the paper for a long time. In part of him, the old version of himself was still standing in that private wedding room, telling himself that being financially safe was enough, that wanting to be chosen was dangerous, that people like him should be grateful for whatever place they were offered. That man had accepted 12 pages because 12 pages could not reject him. Marlowe picked up the termination agreement. Then he tore it in half. Dash stared. Marlowe, I am not staying because the first contract requires it. He tore it again. And I am not leaving because this one permits it. Dash's carefully controlled expression broke into something almost helpless. Marlowe smiled. I choose what happens next. And what happens next? Marlowe stood, walked around the table, and held out his hand. You take your husband home. Tomorrow, we figure out what being married looks like without terms and conditions. Dash looked at the offered hand as though Marlowe had placed something priceless in front of him. Then he took it. Months later, the marble kitchen in the penthouse no longer looked untouched. Baby bottles dried beside copper pans. Ginger tea still occupied an entire cabinet because Dash continued buying it long after Marlowe stopped needing it. The espresso machine had never returned. At Rourke, the new menus carried two names beneath the restored dish, Dashiell Rourke and Marlowe Quinn. Marlowe had also begun developing his own dishes, credited under his own name for the first time in his career. Dash still commanded the kitchen with terrifying efficiency. He still made cooks straighten when he entered. Yet everyone knew there was one person who could taste the sauce, tilt his head, and make Dashiell Rourke reconsider everything. One quiet morning before service, Marlowe stood at the pass adjusting the glaze while Dash entered carrying their sleeping baby against his chest. Too sweet, Marlowe said after tasting the sauce. Dash tasted it. You are right. Marlowe grinned. I would like that recorded for historical purposes. Dash shifted the baby carefully into one arm and placed his free hand over Marlowe's. The silver ring inherited from his father caught the morning light beside Marlowe's wedding band. On their wedding day, Dash had signed his name before truly seeing the man beside him. Now he looked at Marlowe as though there were nowhere else he needed to be. Ready? Dash asked. Marlowe looked around the restaurant they had saved together, then at the family neither of them knew how to ask for when this began. Yes. The kitchen doors opened. This time, Marlowe did not enter Dashiell Rourke's world as a guest, an obligation, or a name on a contract. He walked beside the man who had finally learned to choose him, into a life Marlowe had learned he was worthy of choosing too.